Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be converting this lovely Class 87 to DCC. It's currently on DC, and as you can, if you look at the wheels, look, they're darkened, so this isn't, they don't normally come like this, so whoever's had a play with it before has tastefully put those wheels on. I think they make a massive difference versus the older type wheels. So what do we need? Well, to do this conversion we're going to need a decoder. Okay, so you can, this is an 8-pin decoder, but you can use a 6-pin, that's absolutely fine. Now that decoder is by Zimo, it's an MN170R. Now in order to connect this guy to the train we're going to need what is called a DiGi-Hat. So I'll explain as we go. But the first things first, we need to test that this loco is running okay on DC, so we'll go do that now. Okay, so here we are at the test track. Now I'm just testing on DC. And it runs surprisingly good. I'm impressed. Thank you. It's always good to check them before you convert them, because if you convert them and they're, you know, bad runners anyway. I was told that this was a good runner and the wheels have been darkened, so yep, happy to continue. Okay then, here we are at the bench. Now first things first, you're going to want to take the shell off. Now the pantograph is this end, and I tend to use the battery box as my reference, however that will probably be coming off. So this video will be my reference on how to put the thing back together. Although what you can do, like I do in most videos, is take the shell off, which this should just slide off. And it does, just like that. And I'm going to put this off screen in this orientation, so that I know it goes back on this way. So we've got a red dot on the chassis, that's pretty handy, which is the pantograph end in my case. When you got the shell off, the next thing you want to do is get this off. Okay, so this tag lifts out of the chassis and off it comes. Now what we are interested in is isolating the motor from the chassis, and in order to do that what we need to do is remove the springs and these clips from the motor either side. Now this chassis is very different to some of the others that you'll get from Graham Farish. So we're going to remove that spring. Now inside there's also a brush, so we've got to just coax that out, but it doesn't want to come, but that's okay, we'll get it out in a minute. Let's just go over to the other side. What I'm trying to do is show you what these DiGi-Hats do, and you can probably see the shape similarity. Because this loco is DC, it gets its power from each half of this chassis, right hand and left hand rail, and the power comes up from the wheels to each half of the chassis. Now each half of the motor is then connected via these bushes to each chassis half. Now then, what we need to do is insulate each half of the motor from the chassis, and that's where these guys come in. So they're going to replace our brass pieces with plastic ones. So that's one brush that's just come out, put that to one side, and hopefully I'll get our other one out as well in a minute. There we go, there is our other brush. Now what we need to really do is get these guys out, and they should just push out, but you have to be very careful of the motor armature here. So you can use a cocktail stick like I've been doing. They are very stuck in there though. more than they really should be. They shouldn't be that hard to get out, so I'm going to have to be very careful, I think, in a minute with the screwdriver. There you go. That's one. That's it. And two. I'll be very careful not to scratch the motor itself when I'm doing that. So let's get one of these little DiGi-Hats out, and you'll see the whole purpose is to, I guess, isolate four things. You want each pickup, right hand and left hand rail. This is the DiGi-Hat. You want the right hand and left hand rail to be isolated from your motor. So we're only going to be using 4 wires off our decoder. So this guy here pushes in like that. That looks great. Very cool. And then we've got one on the other side. Just take your time when you're doing this. Okay, so we've got those plastic sleeves in. You want to put your brushes back in. They should, once you get them sort of in there, they should just sort of fall to the bottom. They need to be able to just sort of slide in there. We've got our springs as well. Okay, so next up, you've got the brush and the spring there. There are pieces of heat shrink with the kit, and they push on like this. Okay, it's important that these bits of metal do not touch the chassis. That's the whole idea behind having these bits of heat shrink. So I'm going to just do this one, and I'll do the other one. And that's kind of the kit sort of in there then, really. All it is now is just a case of finding a place for the decoder, which is pretty tight on this 87. Okay, so we've got the heat shrink on these spring, I call them springs, clamps, clips. What I need to do is just put a bit of solder on here, and when I do that, I think the heat's going to propagate, you see, and help us shrink the heat shrink. That's the theory anyway. Got my solder ready. I'm actually going to use a cocktail stick to just hold this down so it doesn't move, and get some solder ready, and go. Right, well that's that one then. Hopefully you just saw the heat shrink up. It definitely did. And then we've got this one to do, so I'm going to just get the solder ready again. The reason I'm using the cocktail stick is it doesn't allow heat transfer, which means the metal part here gets quite hot whilst I'm holding the soldering iron on that. So it's kind of two things at once that we need. We needed solder on the piece, which it's not really. That's got it. Look at that. That's both of those ready. So that's with the heat shrink on. Okay, I'm going to be very careful when I do this so that no metal is touching. These are not allowed to touch and conduct with the chassis half. Now, if we go back over to the loco here, we've got a brush in there and the spring on. Now the idea here is this guy needs to go on, hold it all together. Now the motor is actually insulated from the chassis. It's not actually touching it. especially like this side anyway. So that means I can put the motor wire from the decoder to the motor, and the motor is actually separate from the chassis. The loco itself is pretty much prepped now for the decoder. We still need to work out where we're going to get our pickups from. What I'm going to do here is just remove excess wires that I don't want on the install, because I can cut them down, but there's still potentially a danger there. If they were to short out, they'd just mess everything up. So I'm going to be very careful here. And I know that we don't need this yellow or white wire. We need the orange, the grey, because they're the motor, the red, the black, because they're the pickups. The white is forward lights, and yellow are rear lights, I believe. So let's just do our yellow one first. This one off. Okay, so the danger then, you see, is removed from them actually being able to short out. But then the other day, maybe just cut them if you're not too dab-handed with a soldering iron. Okay, so we're going to use some Kapton tape, and the Kapton tape is to insulate our decoder just a little bit. And I think we're best going this side, I think. It's not a lot, it's just enough. So that's going to go... This is the underside of our motor. This is not a perfect place for this, although I've done this on a lot of locos, it seems to work quite nicely. So this guy is going to sit on there. We've got Kapton tape on the bottom of the chip, so that's our insulation. I'm going to put a bit of white tack on our motor. Now, that's just to hold this in position whilst I get all the wires sorted out. And actually, to be honest with you, it can stay there because it's a nice way of it not jiggling around, causing damage. So once this guy goes back on, it should go over both of those, and we'll find out in a minute, won't we? So what we want to do is wire our orange and our grey wires, because I know they're the motor wires. And that's one motor wire on. So then we'll go to the other side. I'm not stripping the wire off, the insulation off these wires. That's because some wires retreat when you heat them up and some don't. So if they don't, you need to strip the insulation off of them before tinning the actual wire with solder. Okay, that's that one done. So the black wire is going to be our left hand rail. Not that it matters, but we have to be mindful that the shell has to actually go over these wires. So you could grind out this chassis. I think that's not needed because the shell is actually quite loose on this anyway. So I'll show you what we'll do later. What I'm trying to work out here though is this. So you see what I just did there? Okay, so I've aborted that because I just didn't like it. I do not like how that would have been. Now, what we're going to do instead, I've removed this bogey, okay, and all you have to do is loosen that screw, and the chassis halves split apart just enough for you to slide the bogey off and out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually solder these wires to this part of the pickup. I'm going to be very careful here. So then we have to be extremely careful because this can heat up quick, and the best way is probably to remove this plate and solder it. I think I'm fairly confident we'll be alright. Just like that. See? bit of solder, done. Okay, so to stop them wires dropping, because it is upside down at the minute, we wouldn't want them dropping, I'm going to put a bit of tape to bridge the gap, so to speak, but the wires are on the other side of it. I'm actually far happier with it like this than actually on those chassis halves. So if you've managed to take the bogie frame off, because normally when you take it off, you lift it up from the back and lift it forwards, or you put it on at the front and you push down at the back and it's back on, look, just like that. Yeah, I'm far happier with that. You can see through the gap, you know, it's going to be just fine, and our shell will go back on just fine. Let's go and check this on the track before we continue, because we need to make sure this actually works. Okay then, here she is. I've now put DCC on the track, and obviously prior to installing the chip I actually have a decoder tester. So I made sure the decoder worked before even trying to put it in the loco. I failed to mention that earlier. It's something of nothing really. I'm using JMRI to set up my decoders. So we've got power on the track now. And perfect. Absolutely perfect. Okay then, so we have got our battery box, and it can only go one way round because there's a round hole here, and that's meant for the flywheel, which amazingly this thing has a flywheel. And just offering it up, because I'm not going to just graunch it on there and hope everything fits. I do need to well, maybe not. I thought I might have to cut something. I don't think I do. What I'm looking for is where the wires go. Will this cut the wires when I push it on and down and in? And it won't actually do that, which is good. What I want to do though is just put another bit of Kapton tape on here. And then so there's Kapton, there's the decoder, and then there's Kapton, and then what I'm going to do is just put a blob of blue tack there. Okay, and what that's going to do is stop it rattling around, because we've got blue tack, Kapton tape, decoder, Kapton tape, blue tack, and then we'll get this guy back on. And I tell you now, that's actually a really good fitting job. And there we go, guys. Yeah, so let's get our shell back on. And the reason I went for wiring to them bogies, like I said, was because the shell was bulging out, and we don't want that. You know, just for a bit more sort of effort. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Right, let's go test the track, and if we've done everything correct, this should still work. Okay then, so we're back at the track, so we'll just set off going forwards. And then we'll go backwards. She seems pretty happy. You know, that's quite a good crawl. That's very good, actually. Cool. Right. Well, that's it then. We've just converted it to DCC. And as you can see, I mean, this one's a bit of a head scratcher because of how the motor is. On most Graham Farish locos, they're a little bit different. So the 47s and 37s and 50s and most of the DMUs and things, they're a little bit different to this. The This is old school, but the way the motor is arranged in there, it's kind of it requires 2 DiGi-Hats. So I think I need to get another DiGi-Hat now for the other loco I was meant to do. So I'll love and leave you here. I'm not going to run this around, this isn't my loco, but I have actually got a few of these myself, so don't worry, you'll see these again. But it's interesting to see what is involved with making these DCC. It can be done, and you can see how I've done it, or how, you know, specifically how I've done it, because most people would put some janky wires onto the chassis or mill the chassis out for those wires, and the way I've done it I think is the best way to do it. What surprises me though the most really is, I mean, it's quite a clean install, but it, like I say, it required a fair bit of head scratching there, but that's it, guys. If you enjoyed the video, thank you very much for watching and putting up with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers now, bye.